I don't know what we do with, we keep
Well,
we're running out of
is
analogies that we're their Toonsis and we're Toonsis is drunk and we're in the back seat. Like because
it's a
here we
different
go.
kind of terrorism.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's more of their weapon isn't a hijacked airplane or a car bomb or some other suitcase bomb or whatever. Their weapon of choice is disinformation. And they're playing with this disinformation. They're marketing it. They're selling it like a commodity. I can't emphasize this enough. One of the reasons we're in this place right now is because of the marketing of disinformation that started with Roger Ailes, started with some Rush Limbaugh and guys like that, and then expanded outward to the point where Donald Trump's entire thing is co-opted from that marketing of disinformation. Donald Trump's entire platform is populist fascism and idiocracy is derived entirely. I mean, it's knocked off and completely stolen from what Roger Ailes created at Fox News Channel.
Yeah.
And that's his whole thing. His brazenness can't be understated. I'm misquoting lawsuit against Mary Trump.
We were just talking about, Bob, we'll talk to Glenn Kirshner. He's the only one sometimes that can restore my sanity. But this Eastman memo and this coup, I don't understand why this isn't the not only the top story, the story everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, and first of all, was the head of this anti-LGBTQ group, the National Organization for Marriage. They're not just coming for abortion, Bob. They're coming for marriage equality. They're coming, and this guy, he was the one that wrote this. What do you call this? Treasonous? This coup memo?
Yeah.
The 6 step process
it's a roadmap for overthrowing democracy.
Right. So he was the one that tried to get Mike Pence to subvert the Constitution and overturn the results. He's also the one that wrote that ridiculous thing that Kamala Harris isn't qualified to be. She was born in Oakland. Like he wrote that whole thing about how she's not qualified. She's not from here. I'm like, what? I mean, these lunatics, right? But I mean, okay,
un-American.
Yeah, this is the amazing. The amazing thing is the plan is really a shoddy plan, but the upshot is really sinister. The upshot is, let's just go in and scramble the board so it has to go to the House of Representatives. We're going to manufacture a constitutional crisis deliberately. The whole point of that memo is to create a constitutional crisis that eventually I can't even imagine what the media atmosphere would be. I can't even imagine what the social media atmosphere would be around that whole plan being played out and where it would eventually land, because it would eventually land in the House of Representatives exactly as it's outlined in that memo.
Yeah.
And that's a terrifying prospect, because that would have made Donald Trump president. Goes to the House, the way they do that, the way it's all divided up with delegations, Trump would have been reelected president if Mike Pence had gone there. And he would have been a completely illegitimate president.
Well,
There's all kinds of horrible things that would have happened afterwards.
But he already was. I mean, in my opinion, and many people's opinion, he already was an illegitimate president installed by Russia in 2016. But this would have been completely overthrowing and the government of the United States.
We would have watched it on television. I mean, unlike with Russia, where everything's happening in the background, everything's happening subversively. With this, we would have watched that memo played out exactly the way it's written on C-SPAN and on MSNBC. It's amazing. We would have observed our own democracy being ripped off by a professional con man and all of his sucker followers.
Well, as you tweeted, Bob, you said 245 years of democracy came down to Mike Pence, the most spineless Republican ever, but Trump was so bananas it temporarily reacquainted Pence with his long-lost backbone. And I love when you quote me most of all. On Twitter, you said Dan Quayle, savior of democracy, Stephanie Miller with an eye roll. Yes. Okay. Yay for me. But I mean, that it came down to a hair's breadth of one person or another going this way or that.
I mean, imagine if if it hadn't been about re-election and the campaign and the transition. Imagine if that had been about nuclear weapons, and instead of Mike Pence, it was General Milley, or maybe it could have been Mike Pence at some point. One person standing between us and an apocalypse for the Republic is terrifying.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things. Adam Schiff is doing a great work right now, introducing a slate of presidential reforms. Something like
what you always said, that we have to Trump-proof the presidency. That's basically what he's doing. Yeah.
And a lot of good things in that legislation. I hope it gets past the Republicans, because the Republicans ought to know that once they open this door, once they allow this kind of abuse of power, a Democrat can abuse their power in the presidency just as well as a Republican can. And the Republicans need to bear that in mind when they start to vote against it or filibuster this Adam Schiff legislation.
Well, and
but
sadly,
suffice to say,
Democrats are the only ones that care about this country. I mean, yes, this constrains Joe Biden too. But, you know, they count on the Democrats actually care about America and about governance, you know, so that's.
Yeah, and I'm sure the White House is going to have some revisions on that legislation, but probably not many. I imagine Joe Biden's going to go right along with this. It seems within his character to support this legislation, and he needs to. He needs to support this legislation. Now's the time to get it done. And I would propose it needs to go further into the area of constitutional amendments that can't be repealed or overturned with the Supreme Court or whatever other method they're going to use to stop it. But I think this is an important step along the way. It's about time.
Let me get your take before we go on this last, because you're not a legal expert, but you'll do until we get one here.
Which is happening in about 15 minutes.
2 weeks after the election, a team of lawyers closely allied with Trump held a widely watched news conference in the RNC in Washington. At the event, they laid out a bizarre conspiracy theory claiming that a voting machine company had worked with an election software firm, the financier George Soros, and Venezuela to steal the presidential contest from Trump. There was a problem for the Trump team, according to court documents we just saw yesterday. By the time the news conference occurred, Trump's campaign had already prepared an internal memo on many of the outlandish claims about the company Dominion Voting, Smartmatic, the software company, and the memo determined those allegations were untrue. The court papers contain evidence that officials in the Trump campaign were aware early on that many of the claims against the company were baseless. Documents also suggest the campaign sat on its findings about Dominion, even as Sidney Powell and other lawyers attacked the company in the conservative media and ultimately filed 4 federal lawsuits accusing it of a vast conspiracy to rig the election against Trump. Again, this is obviously because of the suits involving Dominion, but there's got to be criminal liability for all this, doesn't there? This is all part of this coup. The Eastman memo, this.
Right. And what this does is it's just another example of exposing all kinds of areas that are just like gaping loopholes in our system that prior to Donald Trump coming along and exploiting those loopholes, most politicians would look at something like that and go, well, these are the unwritten rules of politics. These are the kind of guidelines that we have to follow. It's not codified in law or legislation or the Constitution or anything like that, but these are the sorts of things, the traditions that make this country, let's say, an interesting form of Republican democracy. And so, but that's the kind of thing that Donald Trump just steamrolls. He doesn't care about unwritten rules. In fact, unwritten rules don't even exist as far as he's concerned. He's going to steamroll right over those. Any sort of political traditions, he doesn't care about that. Any sort of sense of presidential decorum, didn't care about that either. And so, and when I say Trump himself, I'm talking about Trump and then all of his copycats and people who are coming up, you know, using Trumpism as a way to climb the ladder. And they're all carved from the same cloth now, and they're going to be exploiting the Trump thing. And so these are all these are all things that need to be locked down in the form of constitutional amendments, further legislation, and so on. Otherwise, the next Trump is going to come along and exploit even more of these things. And before long, we don't even have a republic anymore. And
I'm fine with
where did it go?
I'm fine with going into the future, Bob. But in the past is where most crime has occurred, and there needs to be the word consequences so the thing doesn't happen. Okay, Bob, if you loved me, I'm just saying you would be here and jump out of my birthday cake this weekend in your Captain America bike shorts. But if you don't love me,
wish. Yes, happy birthday to you early. I'll give you a happy birthday early here. And I wish, you know, it's like every day that goes by, we go, oh, we should go to LA. We should move to LA.
Come on.
It's, yeah.
Join
But again,
us.
I think
us.
my mom and Kimberly's dad would dress up like ninjas and break into our house and murder us in the night if we ever started a plan.
Whatever.